reading from the Bhagavad-Gita as it is, third chapter, text number 37. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Kama Esha Krodha Esha Raja Guna Samudbhavaha Mahashano Mahapapma Vidyenam Mihavairinam. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, the personality of God had said, Kama, lust, Esha, this, Krodha, wrath, Esha, this, Rajaguna, the mode of passion, Samudbhava, born of, Mahaashana, all-devouring, Mahapapma, greatly sinful, Vidhi, no, Enam, this, Iha, in the material world, Vairinam, greatest enemy. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Isa Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Purport. When a living entity comes in contact with material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust, in association with the mode of passion. Or in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust, as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If therefore the mode of passion, instead of being degraded in the mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded Himself into many for His ever-increasing spiritual bliss. And the living entities are parts and parcels of this spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence. But by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities, and when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. This inquiry is the beginning of the Vedanta Sutra, wherein it is said, Athato Brahma Jigyasa, one should inquire into the Supreme. And the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Janmadhyasyayato Anvayat Itratarscha, or the origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in the Supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Ram, exhibited his wrath by burning the golden city of Ravana. But by doing so, he became the greatest devotee of the Lord. Here also in Bhagavad-Gita, the Lord induces Arjuna to engage his wrath upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshoran Militam Yanam Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Sayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Sabadantigam Bandeham Sri Guru Sri Yuta Padakamalan Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raganatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijanasetam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishakanvidamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dino Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Govika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastude Tapta Kanchana Gaudangi Radhe Vrindavane Shari Prijabhanu Sude Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Kamesha Krodesha Rajoguna Samubhava Mahachana Mahapapma Vidyanam Ihavairinam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Arjuna was asking the Lord, was asking Krishna that how the living entity, how the embodied being is impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force. So here Krishna is answering, and then the next few verses also, and is mentioning that it is only because of lust that the living entity, the embodied being, is acting in sinful way, and it appears to be that many times this is unwillingly. So mostly the embodied being, the living entity in the human form of life, is acting according to his desires. He has certain desires and then he will try to fulfill them. So for that purpose he is engaged in many activities. But sometimes, even as mentioned here, so he's engaged in activities which he actually doesn't want to do. There's some simple examples. Sometimes the conditioned soul is before a plate, not only, of course, the materialistic devotee or the materialistic person who has no knowledge of God or very little knowledge. But even sometimes the devotees, those overcome by that lust. For example, a plate of foodstuffs is there and the materialistic person will eat and eat, and he knows actually now I'm full, I should not eat more, but still he is eating more. And even sometimes the devotees also, they're eating more than necessary, much more. And then after lamenting, why did I eat so much? It was not necessary. Or so many other activities are there, and the living entity which are performed by the embodied being, and which then he also realizes that actually I should not have done this. And then he's thinking, why did I do that? Why did I say this? Why did I think in this certain way? That is not good. But he cannot control. He cannot control himself. So that is lust only. And it appears to be that the living entity is engaging in certain activities, thinking in a certain way, as if by force. But it is not force, ultimately. It is because already he has thought not in the proper way. Instead of trying to serve Krishna, the Supreme Lord, satisfy Krishna's senses, he's thinking of enjoying his senses. And as a result of that, then he's too much engaged in sense gratification. Then the mode of passion is there and it cannot be controlled. And then as explained in this verse, that if one is too much engaged in these materialistic activities in a mode of passion, then afterwards that will be transformed into wrath, into anger, because the senses are not satisfied. Because the lust is not satisfied, as explained in the second chapter also, towards the end by Krishna. So by contemplating the object of the senses, then lust is developing. So if one person is seeing beautiful woman, then is thinking of enjoying. But then if he is not successful, then the lust is not satisfied, and then there is frustration. Then anger will be there. And then if the anger is not controlled, then he falls into illusion, completely into illusion. So and then the anger is ultimately then a manifestation of mode of ignorance. If there's too much passion, then afterwards ignorance will be there also. So Prabhupada has explained in the purport, so he has very nicely explained about the degradation from the mode of passion to the mode of ignorance. But then he's explaining, and also it is explained in this, ultimately Krishna is explaining that one has to try to give that up, that lust. And one has to come to the mode of goodness. And so towards the end, so he's mentioning that one has to control the lust right in the beginning. So one has to control the mind and the senses. Because otherwise degradation is for sure. One has to understand that so the senses are there, but higher than the senses is the mind. So with the mind one has to control the senses. But of course then the mind is not easy to be controlled. And when the mind is not controlled, the senses are definitely not controlled. But higher than the mind is the intelligence. Of course, then there is there's material intelligence, which is also then not able to control the mind and the senses ultimately, because even the lust, as explained, is sometimes all-pervading. Is there in the senses, is there in the mind, and then there's a lusty intelligence. So therefore, one has to come to the transcendental plane. The plane of the soul. And then with spiritual strength, with spiritual intelligence, sad buddhi, one has to actually guide the material mind and senses. So the material intelligence has to be actually ultimately replaced by spiritual intelligence. Then one will be able to control the mind and the senses. So for that we have to pray to Sri Guru Gauranga Krishna. One has to remember the injunctions of the scriptures, and by that then the spiritual intelligence will come, and then one can control the mind and the senses. And then one is properly situated. Otherwise degradation is sure, because the three modes of material nature are there. Sometimes the mode of goodness, sometimes mode of passion, and sometimes mode of ignorance is stronger. Every day you can see morning is the time of the mode of goodness, noontime mode of passion, and evening time, nighttime mode of ignorance. But even throughout the day and night, so the different modes are there and can overcome the living entity, the embodied being. Even in the morning time, when it is usually the mode of goodness, but still passion and ignorance can also be there and attack the conditioned soul. So therefore one has to be always very careful, and one has to take shelter of the spiritual master, the Supreme Lord. And especially in the age of Kali, one has to take shelter of the holy names, the Maha Mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Nama Chintamani Krishna Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha Purna Shodhanini Bhukta Abhinatvam Nama Namina. Krishna, Krishna Nam, they are not different. So by chanting the holy names, one is in contact with Krishna. And then one is able to understand the things as they are, and then one will be able to think properly, act properly, speak properly. If one is constantly chanting or trying to chant the holy names, trying to remember Krishna. So here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is explaining also that in the Vedanta Sutra it is explained in the beginning, Athato Brahma Jigyasa. Now, Athato now, Brahma Jigyasa. Jigyasa, one has to inquire about Brahma, about the absolute truth. Of course, Brahman, the Param Brahma, the absolute truth, is sometimes misunderstood by some person as the impersonal aspect of the absolute truth. So Param Brahma, so that is actually ultimately the Supreme Lord Krishna. And the impersonal aspect, that is simply the effulgence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, the Brahmajyoti. So one has to inquire about the absolute truth about Krishna. In the beginning, the conditioned soul is in this material world and he has no idea, no knowledge why he is here. But then by the will of the Lord, by the arrangement of the Lord, and through his representatives, through the scriptures, the embodied being, the human being can come to understand about the purpose of life. Why one is in this material world? And what will happen at the time of death? What I'm supposed to do? What is the aim of life? What is the goal of life? So that is mentioned in the scriptures. And the spiritual master, the Lord's representative, is trying to help the conditioned souls to understand the absolute truth. So even by one's own endeavor, to some extent we can know something by reading the scriptures or by praying to the Lord, but ultimately you have to take shelter of the pure devotee who has realized the absolute truth, who can guide one to advance more and more. Simply by one's own endeavor it will not be possible to reach to the highest stage of spiritual realization. But the process is that one has to take shelter of the devotee of the Lord, the representative, the spiritual master. And then one is inquiring about the absolute truth. Tadvidi paripatena pariprashna sevaya upadekshanti de jnanam jnanina tattvadashana, as Krishna is telling Arjuna, that just try to learn the absolute truth by approaching the tattvadarshanah, the person who has darshan, who has seen the absolute truth, that is the spiritual master. And then how to approach him. Tadvidi paripatena pariprashnana sevaya. That is the vidhi. The vidhi, that is the process. Pranipatena pariprashnana sevaya. So one should be very humble. In a humble way one has to approach the representative of the Lord. Then one has to inquire, pariprashna. And then not only that, but one should be engaged in service. Sevaya. Because by nature the living entity is meant to serve the Supreme Lord. Jivera sopoi krishnera nittadas. By constitution, the jiva, the living entity, the embodied being, is an eternal servant of Krishna. So it's meant to serve. It's meant to serve the Supreme Lord Krishna. But in the beginning, although by nature the relationship is there eternally, but in the conditioned state, the living entity is forgetful of the Lord and is a relationship due to the modes of material nature and is in this material world. And instead of serving God, is serving society, serving family, serving others, serving dog. Instead of serving God, many times you can see people serving dog. They're keeping the dogs. You can see in the Western country, now even in India, some people, they are keeping dogs. And they're serving the dog because the natural tendency is there to serve for the living entity. Of course, also Anandamaya Vyasad, by nature the living entity is blissful and he wants to be happy. And so some enjoyment should be there, but proper situation is only there in connection with the Supreme Lord. Paramananda, the source of all pleasure, that is Krishna. Krishnendriya Priti, when Krishna's senses are satisfied, by engaging our senses in Krishna's senses, then our senses can be satisfied. Then we can experience some transcendental bliss, some happiness. Some enjoyment will be there when Krishna is in the center. That is the real enjoyment. Otherwise material enjoyment is very flickering. flickering happiness, and it is not real happiness. So therefore the living entity has to inquire into the absolute truth. He has to try to learn how to properly serve the Lord. And but for that, so he has to be in the mode of goodness. He has to know what is the mode of goodness, what is the mode of passion, what is the mode of ignorance. And he has to see that his thinking properly, by thinking about Krishna, by thinking of how to serve Krishna, how to serve the spiritual master, how to help others, sarva bhutehi te rataha, acting for the benefit of others, trying to control the mind and the senses, not eating too much, eating little, sleeping little, and having a clean environment. So this one has to know what is the mode of goodness, and one has to be in the consciousness, situated in goodness, and then it is possible to control the mind and the senses. And then one can speak properly, respectfully, and one should then glorify the Lord, speak the truth, and then it is possible to act in the mode of goodness. And then from that platform, ultimately, by constantly engaging in devotional activities, one can come to the platform of pure goodness, Shuddha Sattva. But first one has to give up the mode of passion and mode of ignorance. So lusty desires, they have to be given up. One has to try to control that. Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya, the 6 enemies of the mind. First is Kam, so that is lust. And if this is not satisfied, then Krodh, anger is there. And even then, so then further on, Lobh is there, greed. So one is not successful, but still one is trying to get something which is difficult to attain. So that is greed. And then of course that is a situation in one is actually an illusion, moha. One is not aware of one's actual situation, actual nature as a servant of Krishna. And then one should be engaging in devotional service, properly situated in the mode of goodness. So one has to try to be properly situated and not become illusion too much. Because by nature the conditioned soul is always an illusion. But then by engaging in devotional service, by gaining knowledge in the association of the spiritual master, one can become to some extent free. But then one has to be careful and not come under the influence of passion, lust and anger and greed. Otherwise again degradation is there. And if one is then an illusion, so then actually mada, then madness is there practically. Then one becomes like a madman, doing things which are not good for oneself, and then even many times for others. And then envy is there, being envious of others. That this person is nicely situated, he has so much money, so that would be so nice if I could also have money. Or even sometimes amongst the devotees there's some envy there which should not be there, it should be given up. Sometimes if somebody is advancing nicely, another devotee becomes envious, a neophyte devotee. Oh, he's advancing so nicely and I'm not advancing. So one has to be careful and be properly situated on the platform of the soul, Atma Tattva. and try to be free from the influence of the modes of nature, and especially mode of passion and ignorance. So for that we have to constantly try to pray to the spiritual master, to Mahaprabhu, to Krishna, and one has to try to be constantly engaged in spiritual activities with all the senses, speaking about Krishna, hearing about Krishna, serving Krishna or the devotees, so engaging all the senses in Krishna seva, and then fixing the mind on the lotus feet of Krishna. Savai mana Krishna pada ravindayor. He was fixing his mind on the lotus feet of Krishna. Although he was an emperor, he was the emperor, very busy person as the emperor. And then he was family man, he was grihasta. He had more than one wife, he had 20 wives. But still, he was engaged in the service of the Lord. He himself was worshipping the deities, himself. Sometimes rich persons, pious people in India, you can see they have a big house, and then they think we should worship the Lord. They make a small temple. They go there to take darshan. But then they will engage a pujari to do the seva. And they will just do pranam in front of the deities, which is okay. But everyone actually should be engaged in the service of the Lord. Even one is a rich man, he should not just engage a pujari. So Ambarish Maharaj, he was the emperor, he was very rich, emperor. And so many responsibilities. He's the king of the kings. But he was very kind and fully devoted. Although he was married, he had 20 wives or 21. So, but he was not just simply engaged in sense gratification, no. But he was engaged in the service of the Lord. Every day he was worshipping the deities himself. He didn't engage a pujari. So one has to be constantly engaged in spiritual activities, with body, mind and words. Trying to avoid being under the influence of passion and ignorance, which is not easy. It is not easy to be always in the mood of goodness, and then what to speak, to come to the transcendental plane and remain on the transcendental platform. So but by constant practice and by determination and by the mercy of the Lord it is possible. But one has to endeavor, and endeavor to be in the mode of goodness. And not come under the influence of the lower modes. But sometimes it happens, as even in the 6th chapter Krishna is explaining, it's about yoga, and who is the greatest yogi? That is the devotee who is always thinking about Krishna. Yogi nama bisarve sammad kantarantaratmana sarvan bhajati mam sami yukta tamo mata. So one who is always thinking of me. So he's the greatest of all yogis. So there in the 6th chapter it is explained about the yogis, how they are engaging in spiritual activities. They're controlling the mind and the senses. But still sometimes the mode of passion and mode of ignorance are coming, and nothing you can do. Then one simply has to pray to the Lord, my dear Lord, I do not want to be in the mode of ignorance, or I do not want to be in the mode of passion. I don't want lust to overcome me or anger to overcome me. But sometimes it is still happening, and then one has to beg forgiveness from the Lord. And one has to continue. And then one should know that the modes of nature are always changing. So one has to be also patient with oneself. Now mode of passion is there, mode of ignorance is there, and I can somehow not keep that away. It is just on me what to do. But then one simply has to continue. and then the modes are again changing, and then the mode of goodness is more prevalent. And then it is easier to remember Krishna, to be engaged in devotional service. But when the mode of passion and ignorance are there, then the consciousness is impure, and then one cannot properly engage in devotional service. With impure consciousness, then the senses are also impure. So but it is so not so easy, but at least one has to try to be always in the mode of goodness. And therefore one has to stay in the association of the devotees who engage in devotional service, especially the pure devotees, or just the general devotees also. Because alone it is not possible to overcome Maya. But in the association of the devotees, one is protected. One will protect each other. Just like if you have one stick we can easily break. But if you have 20 sticks, to break that is very difficult, not possible. Similarly, you are alone, Maya Devi easily can break you, can capture you. But if you are together with many devotees, 10, 20 devotees, then Maya cannot so easily enter. Then one is protected. So therefore one has to stay in the association of the devotees, and especially with the pure devotees there, then it is more easy, because from him Krishna Prem is emanating and coming upon the devotees who are just nearby. And then Maya has no chance if a pure devotee is there. So therefore we have to always seek the association of the devotees, the pure devotees. Then it is easier to properly situate it in the mode of goodness, and then to be properly engaged in spiritual activities, and to come to the transcendental plane and remain there. Also here Prabhupada at the end is mentioning that lust and anger that can also be engaged in the service of the Lord. Actually everything has to be engaged in the service of the Lord. So also lust and anger, when it is coming, so one should be very eager to engage in devotional activities. So in this way, so lust can also be engaged. If lusty feelings are there, then one should not try to satisfy them, but one should try to serve Krishna with great zeal, endeavor, and then the lust will go away, or will be transformed into love. And the anger, if anger is there, then one can be angry at the non-devotees who are trying to harm the devotees, who are disturbing the other devotees. And the example is given here of Hanuman. So he became angry, and he used that anger in the service of Ram to destroy the enemies of the Lord, the wicked Ravana who captured Sita Devi. So he became angry, Hanuman, and he went to Lanka, and he set Lanka on fire. And Arjuna also. So he engaged himself, although in the beginning he was not willing to fight, but then Krishna told him, no, you have to fight. You're a Kshatriya, it is your duty, don't flee the battlefield. Because by nature you're Kshatriya, you're passionate. And then one in the mode of passion, so he will become angry also quickly. So no harm, be passionate, but you fight for the right cause, you fight for me. Kill the enemies, and in this way your anger will also be satisfied. Engage in the service of me by killing the demons or the envious persons, sinful persons, does not engage in devotional service. So Arjuna was doing that. And then he got all the glory by the mercy of the Lord. So we have to try to be always engaged in devotional service. And if lust and anger and illusion are coming, that is unavoidable, but we simply have to continue keeping Krishna in the center and fully engage in devotional activities. And then the consciousness, the desires, the mind, the intelligence, the senses are becoming purified. And ultimately they become spiritualized. Like the pure devotee or the sadhaka is becoming pure because of always engaging in devotional activities. So which is also like a blazing fire. So there's a blazing fire of lust which is destroying everything. And then there's the blazing fire of devotional service which is purifying everything. So when you have a piece of iron, you put that in the fire, it becomes like fire. So even the iron-like heart or consciousness of the devotee in the beginning, if that is put in devotional service, it is transformed, and it becomes spiritual. Someone has to be engaged in devotional activities, and then the senses become purified, the mind becomes pure, the intelligence becomes pure, and then one is able to properly engage in devotional service. And ultimately then, the material existence is finished for a devotee who is constantly engaged. When the consciousness is pure, then the false ego will not exist anymore. Then the real ego is there, that I am Krishna's servant. And then one will realize one's spiritual nature, one's spiritual form. And then the subtle body will practically not exist. There will be no false ego, no material intelligence, no material mind will be there. But the spiritual existence is there, spiritual intelligence, spiritual ego, spiritual mind, and then the senses also fully purified. And then one can properly engage in devotional service when the senses are purified. So one has to be constantly engaged in devotional service, and then one becomes transcendental. And then there's no question of becoming under the influence of the modes of material nature. So one simply has to constantly endeavor, and success is guaranteed at the end. Hare Krishna. Any question? Everything clear? Yes. Yes. Okay, now? Hare Krishna, keep it like this. No? Mic not working, or the mic? Battery finished? Hare Krishna.
Like in Prabhupada gave example of using wrath in the service of Krishna.
Yes, wrath, during wrath, anger, in the service.
Like using lust in the service of Krishna.
Using what? Lust?
Yes, like Prabhupada write in the last paragraph.
Lust.
Yeah, you can use lust in the service
Yes.
So how
Well, sometimes, just to give you an example, so the gopis are explained there. So they were, of course, the eternal associates, they are pure. The gopis are pure. But it seems to be for only persons that had lusty feelings for Krishna. But that is transcendental lust. So similarly, even if there is some lust there, So, but we can then engage in the service of the Lord by being engaged in spiritual activities. So then the lusty feelings, they will go away. Of course, the attraction is there between men and women, or women and men, and so therefore, if one is not able to fully engage in spiritual activities and doing for Krishna's pleasure, because lust is a perverted reflection of love. So if one is not able to transfer that to loving feelings towards Krishna, if the lust is greater, or is the mode of passion is strong, then it is, for example, recommended that one should enter the Grihastha ashram. And then lusty feelings are there towards the opposite sex, and then but that has to be controlled also. And then in the Grihastha ashram, so there's contact with the woman, and for that purpose then one can engage in contact with the women, but that is also controlled, and that is for begetting children. So in this way, then lust can also be engaged in the service of the Lord. Kamosvi. So Krishna is also saying, I'm that lust. So that is there in procreation for the householders to engage in sexual activity for the purpose of having a Krishna conscious child. So giving another jiva the opportunity to take birth in a Vaishnava family and to become a nice Vaishnava or Vaishnavi. So in this way, so the lusty feelings of this material world can be in this way purified by entering the household ashram. For those who are not able to simply engage in devotional activities. So, but those who are more strong and controlled, like the brahmacharis, or then those who are entering the sannyas ashram, so even sometimes some lusty feelings may be there, but not dwelling on them, either with a consciousness of what to speak of externally, but then even if there's maybe some attraction still there, or the desire to talk with women or to be near women, but then they are controlling that, and rather they are engaging their energy, because ultimately, so the energy is there, and so they use that energy, Kriya Shakti, in the service of the Lord. The ultimate Shakti, that is Srimati Radharani, the Hladini Shakti, the pleasure potency. So, but in the material world, that manifests as the Kriya Shakti. So it's the Dravya Shakti, so that the existence potency just in the spiritual world, that the Sandhini Shakti is there, that is Balaram. In the material world, that becomes as Dravya Shakti. The material elements are there, substance is there. And then the Jnana Shakti is there on the spiritual platform, that is Krishna, the embodiment of knowledge, and we gain transcendental knowledge and engage in spiritual activities. And in material world there is also Jnana Shakti, but that is material knowledge is there. So which is also required, and the Dravya Shakti is there, the material elements are there to be engaged in some way. And then, so the Kriya Shakti is there, the material activities. But in spiritual life, so that is directed towards the Supreme Lord. And therefore the devotees, so they take shelter of Srimati Radharani also, the pleasure potency, who is the greatest of the devotees of Krishna. And we engage in the service of the Lord under the direction of Srimati Radharani. So in the beginning stage, so the material energy is there, the Kriya Shakti is there. So the energy is there, so the brahmacharis, they will use that to serve the Lord. And then it becomes transcendental. But those who are not strong enough, and they are dwelling on the sense objects, and they're too much attracted towards the material world or the opposite sex, the overloading potency is there, or the enjoying propensity is there, if one is not able to be strong enough, then one may enter the Grihastha ashram, and in this way, to some extent, then some enjoyment may be there, but still then Krishna has to be in center. So in this way, then in Grihastha ashram, so the lust which is there, which one may not be able to otherwise control, can be engaged in the service of the Lord by taking care of a family, and then having wife, and then having children as a result of contact with the wife. But then this also, everything is engaged in the service of the Lord. Krihe take vane take. So even staying in the house, one will engage in devotional service. And also, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying, whatever I have, my house, my wife, my family, so everything I use in the service, I'm offering to you, to me arpilum. So I'm engaging that in the service of you, my dear Lord. So the devotee will engage everything in the service of the Lord. So if one is not strong enough in the beginning, one will enter the household ashram, and then the lusty desires which may be there, they may be engaged, so indirect way in the service of the Lord, and one becomes purified by doing that. And then one can give up these lusty feelings of enjoying in this world, and one can then direct the energy, the spiritual energy then towards the service of the Lord. Is that all right? Anything else? Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki.